Got some weather coming. And I was in here a couple years back. I want to say 2021, 2022 time frame maybe. But look at the stump. That thing there is, well, there's a foot, so it's at least 28 inches across, if not more. And I had enough hinge to direct the tree where I wanted it to, down in the hole. And it broke down, not up. And it's not so big that I can't get over the top of it. Let me see what we have over here. This tree I took the subsequent year, the following year. So if that was 2021 or 2, this would be 2022, maybe 2023. I remember being down here in the wintertime, and there's still possibly a grade 2 in there somewhere. You know that? Maybe not. But what I do have is, even though it's getting larger, I got a perfect cookie cut scenario where I can run the big saws, and yeah, the wood's gonna get a little larger as I go that direction, right? Well, maybe not. Huh. No, maybe. But it's big enough that it'll actually make the big saws do some work. So I think that's what we're going to do. Take a look at its stump. Yeah, it was one that was tapped. I obviously wasn't pleased with it. Yeah, look at that mess. Man, that's a big tree though. Put my foot right here. Yeah, 2.5, almost 3 foot across on that one too. And it was a lot of hollow in that. And you can see again, the way I did it was to get the hinge to break down, not up into the tree. So I don't know if I can remember where this one was, or then I had to cut the root flares off and all that. See, one of the things that happens, and one of the reasons why I like doing the big open face cut, is like this tree fell right down on where I did the face cut. So had I left the root flare, that root flare is in the ground and I can't really get to it. And I don't feel like skidding it. So like on a tree like this, I can make the hinge in the root flare work just fine, right? And then since I've done an open face cut, that means I don't have to go back and trim that root flare like I did these others. You know, by trying to roll the log over or wait until I get up to the landing, because with my farm tractors, that'd be like a big giant plow digging a furrow trying to get up the hill with it. So, yeah. And yet again, that stump is a little taller than I like. I'm going to bet you money I did that log with a saw. Yes, I did. I can tell you right now, I did this one here with a saw that had a full wrap, and that's why I was cutting room so I can use the full wrap to do the bore cut. So on this log right here, this tree right here, I lost that amount of wood, which doesn't matter because it was hollow, right? But on trees like that, the full wrap cost me 6-8 inches a tree. And you see how I had to cut to make room so I can get the full wrap in order to get low. I didn't know I had a hollow tree, right? I had no idea until I got into it. So we go around the woods. There was a time I was running a full wrap on a 572, and I was running a full wrap on the G395, and you're going to see cuts like that pretty frequently. But what do we have today? I've just got a little tiny bit of gas in that Homelite, hopefully enough to fire it up. It's been easy starting enough where the carburetor draws well enough that having that 1/2 inch of fuel in the bottom of the tank, it might be able to pull it up. I'm going to give it a shot because I want to dry it out. I want to run it out of fuel, you know. And basically what I do is get it started, dump the fuel out, you know, open up the gas tank and let it come to an idle so it draws as much fuel out of the system as possible. Today I'm going to do a derivative of that where I'm going to run it, do a little bit of limit and try to use the fuel in there until it's about ready to run out. And then I'm just going to let it, you know, dry itself out. I need to retire that saw. I really, really, really enjoy that saw. But it's so hard to get parts and stuff for it. I'd rather know what it's like to run and then keep it intact than run it until something breaks, you know. Conversely, I'm having fun with this heavy beast. And I did a kind of a litany. I went and kind of untangled the models a little bit in my mind. And I put that untangling in a video. I'm not sure if I'm going to combine these two videos or not. But this chassis right here, you know, it has its roots in the 180 through 480 series, a little bit smaller. But it actually started out as the 1100 big monster, like in 73. It wasn't until much later they put the smaller barrel on that big giant honking chassis. So you had the 1100, it was a 99cc saw. You had the 2100, that was also, you know, an update on the 1100, same 99cc saw. And that ran, you know, for several years. And it was that big chassis that they put the smaller top end on, you know, in the mid 70s. So they had their two displacements on the same chassis done that way, but it started with the 100cc saws, this one here. So then I have the 298, which they made for just like 1 year or 2 years, and then went back and called that model a 2101 until the end of its time. And it was the big saw that they sold for, you know, pretty much all through the 80s and right till about 1990. So it had its roots from 1973 all the way to 1990. But that basic chassis, you know, it was a rugged chassis. It was something they could do that with. Obviously did. So we're going to run that some today. And of course, I just finished, I think, solving the major running issue on this Jonsered. And so that's, I don't know, what, 87 cc's, 88 cc's. Homelite in the same range. Now these are both closed port cylinders. That's actually an open port, so it shouldn't, you know, conventional knowledge says it wouldn't run as strong as these closed port designs. And interestingly enough, Homelite came out with an 8800 where they upgraded the handle to something that was more metallic, aluminum, and they put a closed port cylinder on top of that thing. It's supposed to run better, but that retains the old style Homelite cylinder the 540 does, where it has these big giant open transfer ports, big old grooves up the side of the cylinder. It works. Where these were quite a bit more advanced with their closed port designs, both the Jonsered and the Husqvarna. So if I was to pick what should win the drag race, that should win hands down. It should be a toss-up between the Homelite and the Husqvarna, even though that's much later in terms of years. And that's a mid-70s, and this is a mid-80s, 10-year different technology. I think it's underneath that tree. But we're eventually going to run into my old stand because the tree came down on the darn thing. I think it's underneath that tree. Or the next one over. So anyway, let's start the process. And again, this is not meant to be scientific because, to be perfectly honest with you, a ballpark number plus my impressions is probably just as accurate as if I had all the chains all sharpened up and measured it down to the half a second. And as I've been trying to say for many, many years, the real work starts when the tree hits the ground. So a half a second of difference in a saw cut on a you know, 20, 30-second cuts. Ridiculous to fight for that. It's not as important as starting and fuel usage and vibration and all those other things. So let's first see if I can get this started. And again, my goal today is to fire it off and let it run out. Well, this thing feels pretty spunky. And honestly, this one has a lot more throttle response than the Homie does. But I was a little surprised that it didn't feel like it had a lot more power. So they're in the same league, power-wise. But one thing I can tell you is that chain's a lot sharper. So I'm kind of curious to see how the times play out, because similar power with a sharp chain should be quite a bit quicker. But the wood's getting a little bit bigger too, so that might offset the difference. I honestly can't tell you which one got through quicker. But doing this type of stuff, this Sawza, with a throttle response is quite a bit handier, I think, than the Homelite. You know, it didn't have enough gas to matter. And it's always been fuel efficient, at least it's been that way. You could tell I put probably 10-15 minutes on it, and I swear to God I had less than that much fuel in there. It was basically a ½ inch plus the fuel line. So it's fuel efficient. Took an extra couple pulls to start, probably because I had to draw the gas from all the way down to the bottom of the tank, plus it might have had a little air in the line, but it fired up, right? The takeaway is the fuel system on the Homelite's working very well. And it has decent power, nothing extraordinary, but obviously quite effective. It went right through the wood. But it doesn't have the throttle response this one has. And the combination of the throttle response plus the chain being quite sharp meant that working in this small wood was a lot easier with the Jonsered. I just gotta stop the desire to blip it because it has that throttle response. And I'm waiting for that breakup it had where it was, you know, misfiring. It's not there, so I keep blipping looking for it to see whether or not I solved the problem. I think I did. So this actually is running pretty good. I'm going to wind it down just a little more. It started easy. It idles. It doesn't have a lot of fuel. I'm kind of curious if it has any left. No, it's empty. We'll run a Husky that's got 10 years less technology, supposed, than these two saws, and let's see how that one runs. And remember, I've gained about a ½ inch of diameter too in the wood. So what I'll probably do is I got just enough in this one to make another cut, is I'll do the Husqvarna I'll go right back to this to suck the rest of the gas out of it, and then we'll continue with the Husqvarna. Of course, that assumes this Jonsered restart being just about empty. And that's also assuming there's enough gas to make a full cut. If I was to go by feel, that Husky smokes them both, even though it's 1970s. Give this one more shot. It might have enough fuel, and then we're putting it away for the day. Alright, that's about out of fuel. I'm going to put it away. Before, huh? So maybe it's time to take this spark plug and look at that, but it's got something going on. So this will be the third time this Husky has let me down. Well, I may have found it. I went to pull on the switch wire and it broke right off. So if that was out bouncing around, that would create the same kind of a problem. That looks like it's pretty tight. I've got this plug wire away from the cylinder. So let me pull that out so it's not just shorting, and put the cover back on and see if it'll run. switch, so should be a simple fix. But you heard that familiar misfire. This saw runs really, really good. Once I got rid of that stupid governor, this saw really does put out the power. And by feel, I don't know whether it does or not, by feel, I think it really smokes both those saws. And now that I got rid of the governor, it actually has RPMs. Now the question is, will it survive up there? And I'll keep checking the plug to see if I got it that nice tan. But believe it or not, with the chain speed I'm getting out of this and the power, I could actually fell using the bore cut technique that I use with this saw. As you could tell right there, it goes right in. And that wood there got quite a bit bigger, so even after I did the Jonsered cut, this one here, you know, had to deal with the most amount of wood. So we'll see what happens with the times. But by feel, they're all roughly the same power range, but the Jonsered seems like it has as much as these two. It's a match of this one with more throttle response. The Homie seems like it just has that low down Homelite style power. Nice, easy saw to be with. It doesn't vibrate. And this one here is surprisingly zippy for the age. You know what I'm saying? But I have a hunch that if we were to look at the cylinder closely, right next to the Jonsered, the basic layout is similar. I don't know about the port timing. This one has the same kind of horsepower, and it's got almost the same kind of RPMs. It's off by a couple hundred. So I honestly can't tell you. You can throw a blanket over them as far as I can tell between the Jonsered and the Husky. And I am kind of curious to see where the Homie fits and all that, because it just didn't feel like it had as much zip as these two.